So to paint the fish, I don't want just flat, even color. That's why I'm gonna show you a bunch of different techniques, because you wanna create some sort of a texture. So the first thing I want you to do is to get a scrap piece of paper from my paper cutter and do a diagram just like this, label each box, do a longer strip at the bottom. Then, before you can do the techniques I'm about to show, you need to do base coats. So I want you to think about what colors you're going to use to paint your fish, because those are the colors you're going to want to work with, so you can visualize how it's actually going to turn out onto your fish. So these base coats need to dry. So I did 2 different colors, so I was thinking, you know, the lateral line would separate the darker and the lighter color, so I'll probably end up painting a line there too. And then you need like 10 or 15 minutes for these to dry completely before you can do the techniques on top. So I'm going to show you the dry brush, scales, using a paper clip to create some texture, sponge, just doing some dots and stripes, doing a color change from a lighter color to a darker color, and then just the splattering technique. So you're gonna need, if you're working with a partner, I would probably get both palettes out, and in one palette I'd put my colors, and in the other palette is where you're gonna mix your colors. I don't want you just using color right straight from the tube. I want you mixing colors. I don't want just pure, yellow. I don't want flat, even color. I want it to be textured, and I want there to be, different shades, not just, like I said, right out of the bottle. You're gonna need a variety of different size brushes. You're gonna need a toothbrush, a sponge, and a paper clip, and a water dish and some paper towels. And somebody get me some paper towels. So the very first thing I'm gonna do is just to stripe through every one. Maybe I'll do a black one on this. And then when it was dry, I might take and do an even more detailed, thin, maybe white line over it. The more detailed, the more interesting they're going to be to look at. I'd use a small brush for this, or the edge of a flat brush. When mixing color, I want you to use a bigger brush. You'd never want to mix color with a tiny brush like that. That's how they get ruined. And you don't necessarily even have to do like a straight line. Maybe you want to do a wavy line to separate the lateral top and bottom of the fish. So for dry brush, you want to pick a color that you've already mixed that looks pretty good, and a color that's going to be different enough from what you already have there. So I have that darker green, so I'm thinking that this brighter green should show up pretty good. So load your brush full of paint, take some paper towel, and wipe a lot of that paint off. So you get like this drier, sort of scratchier texture. On the bottom, let's try maybe a little bit of metallic mixed with it, and maybe just a little bit darker. So wipe it off, so you get that scratchier texture. And then you could do something on top of that. Maybe then you're going to do some scales on top, or dots and stripes, or splatter paint on top. So you can layer these techniques. So for the scales, I would use a round brush, and we're going to use the edge to make a pattern that maybe, sort of looks like scales. Maybe take some turquoise mixed with a little bit of black to darken it. And use one side, flip it, use the other. And add a little bit of that copper to it for the bottom. And you could use a bigger brush too if you wanted. But when they start to get really light, you might want to load your brush again and cover it. For the paper clip, you're going to want to use some acrylic paint. Most of these paints I have are tempera, but for the paper clip one, you want acrylic. It's thicker, And the bottom needs to be dry, and then you want to do a really thick layer on top that you can use a paper clip to kind of scratch into. So make a mark, wipe it off, and keep going. You could make a different type of a mark too if you wanted. It doesn't have to be a scale. You could maybe do a squiggly line. And you could use the other side of the paper clip to get a bigger design. If that was black, it would be even more contrast. If it was black underneath the copper, I think it would look better. And then you could even take a smaller brush, kind of add some more design to that if you wanted. For the sponging, make sure that if you get a sponge, it's not hard. If it's hard, you need to wet it so it's a little bit softer. And load your sponge, and then go onto a paper towel, because you don't want a big, splot of it. Gonna get some of it off so it's a smaller, lighter texture. And you could do a few different colors if you wanted. And that's the sponging technique. Again, you could do stripes on top or something else on top, splatter paint, the scales. For the splatter paint, you want to use a toothbrush, maybe water down the paint slightly. And it's going to go everywhere, so if you wanted to, isolate an area on your fish, you could use some saran wrap or just paper. And then add the splatter with your finger and the toothbrush. I'm going to do a little bit of a lighter color on top, maybe a little bit of a white to go with that. It's a little bit more interesting. I'll redo that stripe. Dots and stripes, I usually use a smaller brush. I'm going to do black on the bottom for my stripes. And I like lines that aren't the same, so that each one's a little bit different. Instead of just doing maybe just, regular up and down stripes, maybe make them a little bit more wavy. And then for dots and circles, maybe you first want to start with a circle that you then put a dot inside of. Maybe I'll do white or a lighter color just to make them more interesting. And then for a color fade, so to go from one color, like a yellow, to a darker green, you could first start with pure yellow. Maybe add a little bit of white to it. Then add a little bit of green, just a little bit. Might have been a little bit too much, because you want it to gradually change. A little more green. Now I'm going to start adding a little bit of turquoise to the green. And then maybe just a little bit of black. So I want you to practice these techniques before you paint on your fish and show them to me so I can approve them or give you some feedback. And that's what you're doing next.